Okay, so Parshas Tazria. What we're going to do this evening is split the Parsha share into two. We will do half in Mitzvah Hashem on Parshas Tazria, and then we will do half on Divrei Torah for the Seder and for Pesach, and hopefully we'll do the same next week so that we try and fit a bit of everything in. The two ideas on this week's Parsha. The first is from a sefer called L'Sitcha Elyon. I'm excited to have just recently bought this sefer. It was recommended by the famous and wonderful Rabbi from Golker. So I went out and bought it, and so far so good. So far it looks excellent. It's some of the collection of the great Musa giants on the Parsha, and the very first piece on this week's Parsha is an idea from Rabbi Salanta, the founder of the Musa movement. If you take a look at the first box, paragraph 1, if you've got the sheet in front of you, great. If not, please email me at j.golker@gmail.com. I'll happily send you the handout. It says, L'Sitcha Elyon, on page Kuf Mem Ches. This great Rabbi Salanta used to say, Lama nismecha Parshas Tazria. What is the juxtaposition, the connection of Tazria, which follows Shmini? Tazria, sheroiv inyone negoim mitzorah mevuarim ba. The majority of the topic of Negoim and Tzoras is dealt with in this week's Parsha. Why is that juxtaposed? Why does it follow straight on from Parsha Shmini, Sheroiv Rubai Sekes Inyone Ma'acholos Asuras, where the bulk of Shmini deals with the halachas of kashrus. What has one to do with the other? Ella. Says the L'Sitcha Elyon, HaNegoim Boim Al Oven Lashon Hara. It is well known, the Gemara in Erchin tells us, that Negoim come as a result of Lashon Hara, amongst other things, but the primary one, perhaps the most well-known one, perhaps, is that of Lashon Hara. When it comes to eating, we're all very, very careful. We'll check that the place has got a good hechsher, has got a good tu'dah. We will inspect the fruits and the vegetables and everything for bugs and for macholas asurus. We would check multiple times. Shelo yivlu tolas katana, that we wouldn't chas v'shalom eat and consume a bug. However, sometimes we're not always as careful, not about what goes into our mouth, but what comes out of our mouth. Sometimes we can say things which can cause tremendous distress to others. The Torah therefore juxtaposes the parsha of kashrus with that of Lashon Hara, to teach us that just as we should be very, very careful with ma'acholos asuros, with how we're careful with what we eat, kach tizhara b'lashon asura, we have to be very careful with what comes out of our mouth, with our language, with our speech. V'af lemala mizos, and more than that, shekein kan roim b'seder taharosim shetaras hamatzora koshem tarasoichem ma'acholos asuros. The procedure, the purification procedure for the person who spoke Lashon Hara is much more severe than the purification process for the person who ate machalos asuros. Lameidnu, to teach us, as midas hachamura shel diburim asurim, to teach us the severity of wrong speech, v'hamala b'ziras mehem, and the importance of being very careful with them. I saw he adds an idea from the journal, the Kol HaTorah, but from the Manchester Rosh Hashiva. This I cut and pasted from the Yotzei HaChochma. We'll take a look at the next paragraph. V'hinei, Rosh Hashiva Zatzal, the great Manchester Rosh Hashiva of Segal Zatzal, im kol zihirosam mefleges binyonei hadibur. He was known for focusing on being careful with how he spoke. He popularized awareness of the Chofetz Chaim's works on Lashon Hara. He never held back. He always was looking for ways to strengthen his focus on proper speech. That pasuk, one of the constant remembrances, to remember that what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did to Miriam, i.e., she spoke, even though she meant well, etc., etc., against Moshe Rabbeinu. We have to remind ourselves of that, and he fulfilled that because he constantly tried to remind himself of that. We need constant reminders. He had a hand watch, a wristwatch. Watch your words. On the watch itself, it said, watch your words. As a constant reminder, every time he looked at his watch, he says, watch your words. Korapam, and then he tells us an amazing story, which I'll just summarize where the story is that one time the Rosh Hashiva, the Manchester Rosh Hashiva, had to sit Shiva. And a Talmud came up from London to Manchester to visit, to be Menachem Oval, to visit his Rosh Hashiva. And he noticed on the table there was a large painting of the Chofetz Chaim. A picture of the Chofetz Chaim on the table in front of where the Manchester Rosh Hashiva was sitting Shiva. He asked the Rosh Hashiva about that, and he said, why have you put it there? So the Rosh Hashiva said he was worried. When he was about to sit Shiva, he realized that for the next 7 days, hundreds of people are going to be coming in, and he's going to be having thousands of conversations. And he was worried. Am I going to make sure that every single conversation is appropriate? Have I avoided speaking Lashon Hara? So he decided he's going to put up a picture of the Chofetz Chaim, and because in front of the picture of the Chofetz Chaim, you can't speak Lashon Hara. That will be his deterrent. Even the great Manchester Rosh Hashiva was constantly thinking of eitzes to make sure that not only stuff that came in his mouth, but stuff that came out of his mouth is going to be protected and guarded. And therefore, the great Manchester Rosh Hashiva will put up a picture of the Chofetz Chaim on the table in front of him where he sat Shiva to remind him that all of his conversations have to avoid all of that, have to avoid any possible Lashon Hara, Rechidas, etc. So that's the first idea on Parshas Tazria. Let's move on to another idea which I heard from Rabbi Pinchas Roberts, formerly of Hendon Adas, now of Manchester, and he said the following. He asked a series of questions. Question number one: why is it that Parshas Tazria Metzora invariably falls around the time of Pesach? Pesach is not far off, just 2.5 weeks away. And this week is Parshas Tazria, next week Metzora. It falls around the time of Pesach. Why? What's the connection? Number two, why does the Metzora bring two birds? The Pasuk says, Zos tias Torah ha-Metzora b'yom tarosav uvel ha-kohen v'tziv ha-kohen v'lokach la-mitaher shtei tziporim chayos tahoros. You've got to bring two birds. Why does he have to bring two birds? Moreover, one of the birds he kills and one is sent free. What is that about? Furthermore, connecting it to Pesach, the Shibud of Mitzrayim, which we talk about on the night of Seder, what was the cause of the Shibud? What was the cause of the slavery that Moshe Rabbeinu discovered when he went out to see his brothers enduring such persecution? What was the cause of that slavery, and what was the remedy to it? Now, let's take a look at Rashi. If you turn over the page, Rashi says, on the pasuk which says that he has to bring Shtei Tziporim Chayas Tahiros, Rashi says, Tahiros, Prat La'oif Tomei, not a Tomei bird, Lefish HaNegoim Boin a Lashon Hara, because Negoim come as a result of Lashon Hara, Shehu Maise Pitputei Devarim, which is chattering, like a bird, the bird twitter, they chat. Therefore he needs to be reminded. He spoke Lashon Hara. So he brings the birds, they're twitting and chirping constantly. It's reminding him about speech. Now, he has to bring two. Why does he have to bring two? Because some speech is positive and some speech is negative. So he brings two birds which represent speech. That's what birds do. One of them he kills. He shechts. That represents the Lashon Hara, the negative speech that he does. And the other he keeps alive because he has to remember that speech can and should be positive. And that is explained. The Medrash says in the beginning of Shmos, in Shmos Rabbah Parsha Aleph, that's what Moshe Rabbeinu saw. Says the Medrash, Moshe Rabbeinu was wondering, why have the Jewish people, what have they done wrong that they deserve this persecution? When he heard Klal Yisrael speaking, Omar, Lashon Hara yesh beinehem, they are speaking Lashon Hara, how can they be worthy of the Geula? When he heard they were speaking Lashon Hara, he realized, this is why they're being punished. That was the problem. The problem was Lashon Hara. Now, what's the Eitzah? Says the Gemara in Chulin Peites Amud Aleph. Ma umnoseinu shel adam bein mazeh yasim atzmei ki'ileim. Says the Gemara in Chulin advice. The best advice is a person should just become like a mute. He should try and not speak so much. Yochel after divrei Torah. Maybe that comes for divrei Torah as well. Talmud loimat tzedek tedabrim. When it comes to Torah, that a person should speak plentifully. And therefore the Gemara in Chulin is telling us, yes, there is dangers of speaking. There's Lashon Hara, there's Avak Lashon Hara, there's Rechidus, there's Chanifa, there's Sheker, there's 100 different types of bad speech. But doesn't mean a person should be totally silent. There's lots of positive things a person can say, Torah, words of encouragement, etc., etc. It says the Gemara in Erechin, which reiterates this idea in Erechin Tesvav Beis, the famous Gemaras regarding Lashon Hara. Omer Rabbi Chama bar Chanina mataknosa shel mesapri Lashon Hara. What is the takana for those who speak Lashon Hara? Im Talmud Chacham hu yasuk b'Torah. Because the takana is to use speech for a positive way, and therefore we ask several questions. Why Tazria Matzorah falling around the time of Pesach? The answer is because the reason why the cause of the shibud, the cause of the slavery that Moshe Rabbeinu discovered, was we were not being careful with our speech. There was Lashon Hara amongst the Jewish people, and therefore Moshe Rabbeinu says, "Ochein noida hadava." Now I understand why Klal Yisrael is suffering this fate. What is the takana? What is the remedy? The remedy is, says the Gemara in Erechin, the remedy is you take the two birds, one of them you shecht and you get rid of the evil negative speech, and you let the other one fly and flourish. That represents the positive speech, the divrei Torah, the words of encouragement, the chizuk, and the more positive speech. That's really what's going on. That's the connection between Tazria Matzorah and Pesach. And that's why on the night of Pesach, there is a real focus on positive talk from Gamliel, etc. The whole mitzvah, Siput Yetzias Mitzrayim. The whole idea is about using speech in the way it should be used for, in a positive way. Okay.
Rabbi Golker, can I ask you a question?
Please,
on what you
please.
Said? Thank you. You said that the purification process for when one speaks Lashon Hara is more severe than the purification process when one eats something not permitted. What is the latter purification process?
So it's a good question. I didn't explain that fully. What it means is that the strict halacha is that if a person eats macholas asuros, then he gets malchus if he eats the correct shear and he's warned, etc., etc., and he gets malchus, and it's it will all be over pretty quickly. If he eats less than a shear, then there's no punishment. If he wasn't warned, all the rest of it. Mashenkin the Metzora, it's the consequences are much more significant. He has to bodod yeshev, he has to close his business, he has to go and sit, in solitary confinement outside of the camp. He's treated as if he was in cherem, and this could go on longer than just the 1 week. So it's a much more sort of longer process with many more consequences. That's what I mean. Not necessarily severe, but much more involved.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay.